I'm 23, British male, and in June 2023, my family and I went to Alaska for a road tripping holiday for about 2 weeks. It was 4 of us in this motorhome, visiting some of the towns and national parks along the southern coast of the state. About a week into the trip, we reached Denali National Park. Denali is stunningly beautiful and absolutely huge, sitting at around 6 million acres of wilderness. We went to the visitor center and all booked onto an animal spotting bus tour for the next morning. The bus would take us as far into the park as possible, finishing at a bridge over a large river before it was meant to turn back around and take the same route back. I'm really big into my traveling. I've been to the Andes Mountains, Himalayas, the Sahara, the Colombian jungle, and have seen a lot of the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But nothing had prepared me for this day. We got up early and got onto the bus and set off. The journey would take about 3 hours to reach the bridge. It was a stunning, sunny, windless, clear day. I saw the national park's centerpiece, Mount Denali, standing at over 20,000 feet in the distance, with storm clouds hanging over it. We also saw moose mothers and babies and bald eagles. For the American listeners, us Brits aren't used to big or wild animals. We have no wolves, bears, lions, or moose. I'm pretty sure the most dangerous animals in our country are cows and aggressive dogs. So while I was mesmerized by the animals, the thing that really took my breath away were the views. Seeing such raw, untamed natural beauty as far as the eye can see is something you can't forget. Remember, I've seen some of the world's most impressive mountain ranges, but the Alaskan wilderness had something different. The bus driver along the way was telling us if we wanted to get off the bus and hike, to go ahead and do so. All we had to do was make it back to the bus stop, and we'd be collected later. I remember I asked him, "How many bears are there in Denali?" He told me there's only 300 bears in Alaska's largest national park, and being the cocky little shit I am, I kinda liked those odds. I remember when I was walking around Cabela's hunting store a few days before and seeing the bear spray. It was $60 a can, and I thought to myself, fuck that, you robbing bastards. After some time, we finally reached the bridge, and therefore the end of the road. We got off to stretch our legs, and I remember looking around and seeing these sprawling mountains and hills in every direction. My family aren't hikers, but I am. I like to make the most of the places I go to, and knew I just had to climb one mountain in particular in the distance. It was called Polychrome Mountain. I know you'll think it's mental that I was going to go hiking in the wilderness on my own, without bear spray. But since my family don't like hiking, it was either on my own or not at all. I set off towards the peak. The brush was tall and thick, especially for a 5'6" short-ass like myself. The sun was hot that day, and the bugs were sticking to me constantly. After about half an hour of walking through the brush, I finally reached the base of the mountain, and once I started getting uphill, the breeze picked up and the bugs pissed off. I'm convinced I saw a wolf spider on the way up, hanging out of his burrow, and once I got a bit closer, he shot back into his hole. I'm no fan of spiders, but just muttered, onwards and upwards. Once I got up high, I visualized it was going to be a horseshoe route, follow the ridge along until I reached the top of the mountain. It should take no more than an hour or so to get over there. Once I reached the peak, I sent up my drone and had a scout about, trying to see if I could find an animal and film it. But there was nothing as far as the eye could see. I'd never felt so alone or at peace. I had to look to see which route I'd take back to the road. I could see the bridge in the distance, maybe 2.5 miles away. At the base of the mountain was a re-entrant and a stream that led right back to the river. I thought rather than trek back through that thick brush, I'd drop down the sketchy mountain face, get to the stream, and follow it back to the river, cut a left, and then I'd be at the bridge. So I slid down the screed to the base, reached the stream, and set off. I remember thinking back to what the park rangers said. If you're hiking, make a noise, as bears would then actively avoid you. Since I didn't have a bell, because walking around with a bell on you seems like a right weirdo thing to do, Instead, I put on some music and started singing. I was walking down the stream for about 20 minutes until I suddenly heard this rustling in the brush. I stood dead still, and everything went quiet. Maybe 60 seconds later, I started moving forward again cautiously, and then I saw this large grizzly bolt out of the bush, away from me, up to higher ground, roaring as he went. He got about 70 to 80 meters away from me on the high ground, turned around, and was staring directly at me. Being the dickhead I am, I snapped a quick photo of him since my friends and family would never believe me otherwise. But then common sense kicked in, and this overwhelming sense of intimidation took over me. I was staring dead off with one of the world's most dangerous predators, in the middle of nowhere, alone, and with no phone service. I made sure not to turn my back, and instead walked sideways to continue down the stream. And that's when he started following me, going in the same direction. He did this for a few minutes, before unsubtly changing his direction, and instead just started walking directly towards me. I know he was already within the danger zone, which I'd be told multiple times was 100 meters. Once he was about 60 meters, that's when I started shouting, hands above head, making a proper nuisance of myself. This big bastard couldn't have given a shit. He just kept walking directly towards me. He hit about 50 meters mark, then let out this huge roar and started charging down the hill towards me. I can only explain what happened next as time freezing. I remember all the advice about a bear charging being, do not run. Stand your ground and call its bluff. The issue with this, however, was this bear had seen me, followed me, weighed me up, got close, and was now charging. I could not see any scenario where this was going to be a fake charge. Reality hit for me again. I'm in the middle of nowhere, alone with no phone service. I was under no false illusion that the grizzly was coming down to rip my face off and tear me to shreds, while no one would be able to hear me scream. As he came charging down, I knew I'd have a few seconds where I'd be out of view. To quickly explain the terrain, I'm on the west side of the small stream. It was ankle deep and about 4 to 8 meters wide. The bank behind me was about 20 feet high, and on the grizzly side was a huge hill, of which he had the high ground and was charging down from. Just above the stream was low-hanging shrubbery and young tree leaves. I thought once he reached the high bank of the river and came running down, I'd be obscured by the foliage, and I would use those few seconds to turn and climb out of the riverbank. With time still feeling 100 times slower, I stood and watched him barging down toward me, growling and roaring as he went. Sounds I will never forget. After what could have only been a few seconds, he reached the bank, and I watched him disappear below the tree leaves. Within a second, I turned and climbed out of the steep 20-foot riverbank, using roots to aid my climb. I rolled out over the top, stood up, and started sprinting. My plan now was to run as far as I could toward the road. Now, I knew I was no match in speed for a grizzly. Even a fully grown 300-kilogram male can reach over 30 miles per hour, but I figured if I could somehow get close enough to the road, someone might hear me while I'm getting ripped apart. The only issue with the plan was, the road must have been at least 1.5 miles away. Adrenaline was running high, senses heightened, and I could hear the blood pumping around my body. My headspace in that moment knew it wasn't a case of if he gets, but when. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind while I sprinted. I was thinking to myself, my luck has finally run out. I've done some dangerous things in my life, but this is how it ends. I'm 23, and I'm about to have pretty much the most fucked up end a human can have. After I ran maybe 300 to 400 meters, I could faintly hear another huge growl from the bear. I quickly glanced back and saw the grizzly had in fact crossed over the stream and climbed out of the bank. He was stood on his back legs, sniffing the air in the exact spot I'd been a few moments before. I kept running, and while I started filming a video on my phone, saying my goodbyes to my mom and dad, hoping that someone might at least find my phone eventually, assuming they wouldn't have a body once the bear catches up with me at any moment now. The whole time I was running, I was waiting for the giant thuds to come bouncing up behind me, preparing myself to hit the floor and curl up. I'm a fit lad and can run fast, but with my gear on my back and such wild ground, it was no easy task. I was crashing through the brush at full speed and over undulating ground, so it was only a matter of time before I fell and snapped my ankle, like one of those pricks you find yourself rolling your eyes at while watching a horror movie chase scene. Again, though, I stood up and kept running. The adrenaline was surging. I ran for another mile before I could finally see the road. Once I was on the road, I finally felt some relief, but moving from the softish ground to the now hard asphalt was really doing a number on my ankle. I knew it was fucked, but I wasn't going to stop until I reached the bus stop. I saw the bus stop was quite busy. I reached it and asked the guy with the clipboard when I could hitch a ride back. He said it was a couple-hour waiting list. I then asked him to direct me to the ranger station so I could report the encounter. I knocked on the hut door and was welcomed in. I told them I'd been charged by a grizzly, and then they got their binoculars out. They said they could see him a couple of 100 meters from the road. Once I told them about the encounter and its behavior, they assured me I did the right thing, and they were also sure that he was in fact coming down to kill me. They then got me this booklet to fill out about the encounter. There must have been about 10 questions on there, but one of them I'll never forget. The question asked me, "What was the mannerism of the bear, do you think?" What a piss take. I'd never experienced that certain death feeling I'd heard people speak about. That feeling that in just a few moments, it's all going to be over. Being totally convinced you're about to die, and in such a horrible way too. For months after the encounter, I'd have dreams or flashbacks as to what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. I find the saying, bear attack, doesn't do enough justice to what those things can do. You've got to remember, it's a 200 to 300 kilogram of angriness crushing down as it stands on you, its claws shredding and tearing your skin as it slashes you, its jaw crushing your bones with each bite, and all the while, it's trying to literally rip and bite your face off. Honestly, I can't think of a worse way to go. I remember a friend sent me a news article about this Californian woman who got mauled to death by a grizzly a few weeks later, and that was how she ended up. A tragic, horrifying end. I'd often think about her final moments, the pain, the helplessness. Now, hindsight can be a hell of a thing, but even despite this incident, it was still one of the best hikes I'd ever had before I encountered the grizzly. Some of you may think I was a fool for hiking on my own too, but in a way, I'm glad I was. I'd been quick thinking and fit enough to be able to escape it. If I'd been with one of my family, there's no way they could have kept up with me, and likely would have frozen in the moment. Especially since I knew I would never have left them behind too. So, had circumstances been different, it would have gone south. Without doubt. All I can say is, I got lucky. I was on one of my first solo backpacking trips in the Spring Mountains of southern Nevada. My plan was to do Mount Charleston in 2 days, spending the night, then bagging the peak and heading down the next day. If you haven't been there, the trail is gorgeous. It winds up around the rim of a big valley before veering up to the summit ridge and offers just some awesome views. About 2 miles into the ascent, a faster hiker overtakes me. Rather than just nod and continue on, he stops and matches pace with me, and we strike up a conversation. Nothing particular was weird about what we talked about, but something was just a bit off about him. He was too intense, too friendly. His charisma felt almost manic. You ever see the interview with Tom Cruise where he talks about Scientology? This guy was like that. Same kind of artificial friendliness. He was too type A, too glib, almost like he was imitating a genuine reaction. I recall him telling me that he really liked challenging himself, but felt sick because nothing really felt hard or exciting anymore. Nothing really made him hard like it used to paraphrase. Well, the jabroni's vibe was really freaking me out, so I made an excuse to stop for lunch. This guy kept hiking, and I thought that was the end of it. I had an awesome rest of the day, and as I hiked, he slipped further from my mind. I found a gorgeous campsite on a promontory jutting off from the valley wall and settled in for the night. As night fell, as happens to all of us when we're alone in the back country, I started getting squirry as hell. Full-blown jitters, man. My mind kept jumping back to how weird that guy was and how he acted like something thought a regular human should act. To make it worse, I was cowboy camping. Not even the dubious protection of nylon between me and the potential of seeing Smiley Guy. So in order to ease my anxious mind, before going to bed, I set my fixed-blade knife in easy reach right next to my head. I eventually got to sleep after listening to a few episodes of Mike Duncan's The History of Rome podcast. I slept unusually soundly, not waking once the whole night. When I woke in the morning, I felt unusually content and well-rested. That is, until I went to grab my stove out of my pack. The location of my pack wasn't the issue. It was where I had left it, leaning against a pine about 5 feet from my pad. No. What really freaked me out was that every single pocket was open. All the zippers unzipped, all the snap closures unwrapped. The sleeping bag compartment was open. The interior mesh compartments were open. The buckle closures on my stuff sacks were clicked open inside the bag. Nothing was taken, and the bag hadn't been moved, but literally every pocket was open. I wigged. I made sure they were all closed the night before. I'm fastidious with my gear. Someone had opened them. In panic, I looked down to where my knife lay on the ground, next to my pad. Sure enough, the snap closure that held it to its sheath had been snapped open. Let me tell you, I set the fucking land speed record hauling gas off of that mountain. In the late 80s, I was in my early 20s, and 2 friends and I went camping in Central Florida. 2 of us were working for the Park Service at the time, so we were able to camp for free in other parks in the state. Both of us had done a lot of camping before. Me, I grew up camping with my family on every single vacation, all over the state. For the other friend with us, this was her first camping trip ever. We were camping in the youth area, which was empty that weekend and was quieter and more isolated than the regular campsites. Later in the afternoon, on the second day of our trip, we were all sort of spread out in the area of the campsite, being within shouting distance, but enjoying a little solitude. I was collecting firewood. Every now and then, I'd kind of feel like someone was watching me. I'd look around, see and hear nothing, and then I'd shrug it off and go back to what I was doing. Later on, around sunset, we had the bonfire started. One of the rangers who lived on site about a quarter mile away came over with a truckload of firewood and a 6-pack of beer. We all sat around talking for a while. Well after dark, we could suddenly hear what was probably a bunch of teenagers fooling around on one of the trails a couple miles away. Since the trails were closed at sunset, the ranger and my coworker drove off to shoo them back to their campsites. My other friend and I were just relaxing around the fire, talking a little, mostly enjoying the night and the peace and quiet. All of a sudden, I had a cold chill go over me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and out of nowhere, I was terrified. I tried to ignore it, but it kept building. I didn't say anything to my friend. I didn't want to scare her. Then I glanced over at her just as she glanced at me, and she said, "Do you feel that?" "Yeah, I think maybe we'd better get to the car," I said. We both felt like we were in deadly danger, but no idea from what. We started walking at a casual pace, not wanting to appear scared. Then halfway to the car, we looked at each other again and simultaneously broke into a dead run. We reached the car, jumped in, and locked the doors. We then turned on the headlights. I sat there with my pistol, feeling like it was totally inadequate for whatever was out there. We both just sat, looking straight ahead. We were afraid to look around. I had the feeling at one point that if I turned my head and looked out the window, I'd see something that would drive me insane. I don't know how long we sat there. It was probably just a few minutes, but it felt like forever. Then it just left. We could actually feel it going away. A few minutes after that, the other two came back in the truck. We kind of laughed it off afterward, but I'll tell you, I've never been that scared before or since. I've faced a lot in my life, and nothing has so completely terrified me like that. I don't know what it was, but I'm still convinced we were in terrible danger. I grew up in Wyoming, but for some reason, we generally went to Colorado to go camping. I was about 12 years old, early 80s. I woke up early or in the middle of the night. It was dark and we were in the mountains, so it was cold. I was going to get in the car because I was freezing. I climbed over my brother, waking him up in the process. Of course, he said he had to pee, which I thought was probably bullshit because he always had to follow me wherever I went. Anyway, we get out of the tent and it's getting light out, so I decided to stay up. He, of course, wants to know what I'm doing because I told him I was going to the car. I told him the sun was coming up, so I might as well stay up, and I pointed to the light across the top of the mountain. Now, yes, my brother was a little pissed, but he was a Cub Scout. Also, I was absolutely directionally challenged until I was well into adulthood. My dad joked that I'd get lost going to my own room. Anyway, the Cub Scout tells me that the sun doesn't rise over there, and being the older sibling, I was required to argue. Of course, this woke my parents, and my dad sticks his head out to holler at us, and notices the bright red glow as well. Only he knows exactly what it is, a forest fire. We grabbed our stuff lightning quick, didn't even take anything out of the tent, just collapsed it and shoved it and everything else into the back of our 1976 Ford Country Squire. My dad drove as fast as he dared on the shitty, narrow, winding gravel road. He kept telling us everything was going to be fine. We were well ahead of the fire, but between the quickly thickening smoke and the lack of guardrails between us and what looked like the abyss was scaring the bejesus out of me. We hadn't been driving very long when we saw a game warden truck coming out of one of the side roads to another campground. He flashed his lights and us. We stopped, and my dad talked to him for a bit. Apparently the fire was spreading quickly, and he was out evacuating campsites. He did tell my dad that we had enough time to get out and not to panic. It didn't seem to do any good, because we were going at a pretty good speed again, and I didn't feel particularly relieved until we got back home. Every time I see videos of people escaping wildfires out west or up in Canada, I remember that, and that tiny spot at the back of my brain freaks out a little bit. I went camping some years back with my girlfriend, and it was one of our first times away together. I didn't really know her comfort level for being out in the woods, So I booked a non-remote campsite where you can kind of see other sites from yours, and you're not deep in the woods. We got in the late afternoon and it set up right away. Later that evening, while we were eating and drinking around the fire, some guy pulls in alone at the site closest to ours and starts setting up. He comes over and asks to borrow a hammer for the stakes. I give him my hatchet, blunt backside, and he seemed pretty shy and lovely. So we told him if he wanted to stop by for a drink later, we'd be there. Well, he comes back later to return my hatchet and stays for a drink. He doesn't say much, even with us including him in the conversation. Nice enough, but very reserved and really just content with observing the conversation. Some time goes by, and I do the stretch, and the old, I'm getting sleepy. Nothing. Eventually my girlfriend just says goodnight and goes to bed. Him and I sit there for a bit, until I just stand up and say I'm going to bed. He says goodnight and leaves. I go to my tent, and he goes and starts his car, and then he just sits in it. Maybe this isn't crazy, because he never made a fire, but it's not that cold, and he just keeps it running for hours. I finally fall asleep. I wake up in pre-sunup hour to pee, and sure enough, the guy is still just sitting there, running his truck. Back to bed again, and wake up with the sun, to see that his tent was still there, but his truck was gone. Also, and very weird, our car door is wide open. There's nothing missing, and no explanation, as there was no food in there. Now, I know this doesn't sound terrifying, but all I can say is that you had to be there. The vibes were just off. My girlfriend and I convinced ourselves that we were spared from being axe or hatchet murdered due to our kindness. When I was a kid, we used to go on camping trips in the summer with my parents' caravan. One year, my sister and I decided that we wanted to sleep in a small tent instead, which was set up directly in front of the caravan. We didn't even make it one night. Every now and then, the both of us clearly heard the sound of something rubbing against the tent. We were scared shitless because we thought someone was walking around our tent. I don't remember how we got out of the tent. I guess we started screaming for our parents at one point or something. My father took a look around, and we tried again, but after a while, heard the same sounds again. We ended up sleeping in the caravan anyway. A few days later, we still didn't want to sleep in the tent, so my father started to disassemble it. Turns out, some animals built tunnels directly under the tent, and in doing so, rubbed against the bottom wall. We didn't notice anything because we were lying on inflatable mattresses. We only heard the sound of them and rubbing against the wall. It's pretty funny now, but damn, were we creeped out at the time. I'd say the most life-threatening thing was becoming hypothermic out in the middle of nowhere. Unable to make a fire because my hands didn't work, and everything was either soaked or green. But that's not very interesting. The other big one that comes to mind was when I was camping during a derecho, the one that swept through West Virginia a while back. For those who don't know, a derecho is basically a big wall of really fast-moving wind that rips up trees and can literally push small buildings over, among other things. It might not sound that bad, but trust me, it is incredibly unnerving when you're in the middle of the forest, surrounded by trees. Unfortunately though, that actually wasn't the scariest part of the night. Long story short, I'd set my tent up in a single-walled pavilion, so I felt mostly protected from flying debris and falling trees. But unlucky for me, a big black bear apparently also decided to find shelter under this very same pavilion, and suffice to say, it was not happy sharing the space. Now, I've had plenty of bears outside my tent at night while camping, but this was particularly frightening because as this clearly very scared and angry bear ran circles around my tent, seemingly deciding what to do with me, I could hear its claws clacking against the cement slab foundation of the pavilion. With each galloping stride, I heard the tap, 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 tap of its very clearly massive claws, accompanied nicely with its intermittent huffs and puffs of anger and confusion. Of course, along with the calming sounds of gale-force winds ripping up the forest around me. So yeah, needless to say, that was one of the scariest nights of my life, and to this day, one of the only times I haven't been able to scare a black bear away from me. Usually they're all a bunch of scaredy cats, but the storm had apparently riled this one up so much, there was no amount of guttural screams and strong language that could convince it to leave the safety of the pavilion. It just continued running circles around me, frequently leaving the pavilion for a few seconds, only to immediately return, just as angry as ever. And I could only sit there, hoping to wait it out, opting to pass the time by duct taping my hunting knife to my hand, should worst come to worst. So, I just got back from a 2-week rafting trip down the Missouri River with my buddy, and I've got a terrifying story to share from the very last night of our trip. We were on some really remote land, camping by the river, and just enjoying the beauty of the wild for the last leg of our journey. This incident, though, has left me shaken up, and I figured I'd share it here in case anyone else has had a similar experience. For some background, we'd been camping on wild land throughout the trip, just the two of us. It was a pretty grueling experience, paddling all day, setting up camp at night, cooking over a fire, and getting by in the middle of nowhere. But that night, the last night of our trip, felt different. We had spent a long day on the river, and we were both exhausted, ready to call it a night. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up needing to take a leak. My buddy was still snoring away in his tent, so I quietly crawled out and walked a little ways from camp to do my business by the river. The air was cool, the river was gently flowing, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of the trees in the wind. The moonlight was just enough to make everything visible, but not too much to give away too much detail. It felt peaceful, until it didn't. As I'm standing there, minding my own business, I hear a noise. It was a sharp crack, something moving through the brush. My first thought was maybe a deer, but then I heard it again, louder this time. A big sound. My heart immediately started racing. I tried to stay calm, thinking it was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I froze midstream. My instincts were telling me to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I slowly looked up, and that's when I saw it. There, just 8 feet in front of me, standing in the shadows of the trees, was a massive mountain lion. I can't even begin to describe the feeling that washed over me in that moment. My heart stopped, my breath caught in my throat, and my body just locked up. It was the size of a small dog, maybe larger, but its body was lean and muscular. Its fur was the color of dry grass, and those eyes, those yellow-green eyes, were piercing right through me, like it was reading my every move. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I stand my ground? I was frozen. I'm not sure how long we just stared at each other. It felt like an eternity. I remember my mind racing, trying to process what was happening. I'd read about mountain lions before, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing one this close. The fear was so real, so raw. In that moment, I realized how small and helpless I really was. The lion didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or move much, just stared at me, and I stared right back. It was like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. My body felt like it was glued to the spot, and I couldn't even tell you what was going through my mind. I know I was in total fight or flight mode, but I couldn't do either. I was just stuck. Then, finally, the lion shifted ever so slightly, and I could see its muscles coil. That was when I thought for sure it was going to charge. I was about to piss myself for real, and that's when it happened. The lion turned away, like it decided I wasn't worth the trouble, and it slinked back into the woods as silently as it came. I don't know if it was just me being lucky, or if it had second thoughts, but I was shaking as I slowly turned and stumbled back toward camp. My mind was still racing. I don't know how I managed to walk back to my tent, but I did, and I woke up my buddy to tell him what happened. Of course, he wasn't convinced at first. No way, man. Mountain lions are really rare in Missouri. I don't think that was one. He was still kind of half asleep and kind of brushed it off. I was still in shock, so I let him talk me down. If it was a mountain lion, he said, you probably just startled it. They usually don't bother people unless they feel threatened. To be honest, I wanted to believe him. I was exhausted, physically drained from days of rafting and barely sleeping, and I really didn't want to deal with the idea of a mountain lion lurking around. So I decided to calm myself down. I convinced myself that maybe it was just a weird encounter with a bobcat or something, though I knew deep down it wasn't. So I climbed back into my tent, still shaking, but eventually passed out from sheer exhaustion. But then, it happened again. It wasn't long before I was jolted awake by a loud noise, closer this time, the snap of a twig or something, and it sounded like it was right outside our camp. I sat up instantly, listening hard. I pressed my ear to the tent wall and heard something moving, slowly, deliberately. I didn't wait to figure out what it was. I immediately looked out the screen window in my tent, and there it was, the lion. This time, it was even closer, maybe only 2 feet from the tent, moving slowly past us. I could see its form through the screen, a massive shadow slipping through the moonlight. My heart was in my throat. It was like we were being hunted. I immediately started yelling. I don't even remember what I said, but I was screaming into the dark woods, trying to make myself sound bigger, scarier. I grabbed a paddle, ready to swing it if I needed to. My buddy shot out of his tent at this point, and we both knew we had to act fast. My buddy was packing up his stuff frantically, but I was too rattled to be helpful. I just kept shouting. After a few moments of chaos, we got into our rafts and took off down the river. We paddled furiously, as far as we could, not stopping until we found a new campsite across the river. It was pitch black by this point, and neither of us said much. I don't think either of us could sleep after that. The next morning, we went to a local bar to grab some breakfast and relax a bit after the stressful night. I told a couple of the locals what had happened, and some of them were really surprised. They'd lived in the area their whole lives and had never seen a mountain lion. One of them said, "Well, that's something. You're lucky, man. Most people don't ever get a glimpse of one." To this day, I don't know if I'm lucky or cursed. I'm still trying to process the whole thing. I don't know if I'll ever forget the way those eyes looked at me. The sheer terror of knowing how close I came to being prey. I guess if there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that the wilderness isn't something to take lightly, and neither are the creatures that live in it. I won't forget that night anytime soon. I'm an avid hiker and backpacker, and I recently went on a hiking trip in the Scottish Highlands with a group of friends. We planned to stay at a bothy before tackling some hills the next day. For those of you who don't know, a bothy is basically a basic shelter in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes an old farmhouse, sometimes a shed, anything to keep you warm and dry. They're free to use and usually come with a fireplace, some basic furniture, and minimal amenities. You don't need to book them or anything. You just show up. Sounds good, right? So, we found ourselves in an old farmhouse built back in the early 1800s. It has 2 stories, spacious enough for all of us to spread out upstairs and get some rest. The weather was cold and damp, and we had the fireplace roaring to keep warm. It was one of those perfect nights when you're in the middle of nowhere, everything's quiet, and you're just listening to the crackling fire while chatting away. No one else was around, as far as we knew. This particular bothy was a good few hours' walk from the nearest road, so it wasn't exactly a hot spot for passerbys. At about 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. It wasn't from a noise or anything at first, but I just felt uncomfortable. I lay there for a few moments, trying to shake it off, but then I heard something. The front door of the bothy creaked open slowly, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps, like someone walking around the main room. I froze. My mind immediately started racing, trying to figure out if it was one of us, if someone had gotten up in the middle of the night for some reason, or if someone else had wandered in. The footsteps continued for a minute or two, slow and steady, and then there was the unmistakable sound of the door slamming shut. After that, silence. Complete, utter silence. Now, at this point, we were all wide awake and fully alert. It was a gut instinct, but we all felt the same way. We were in the middle of nowhere, and I can't imagine anyone walking all that way, especially at 3 a.m. It wasn't like someone was casually passing by, and yet, it felt like someone was in the house with us. We couldn't ignore it, so we all decided to check things out. We tiptoed downstairs, and we didn't say a word to each other. Everyone felt that strange tension in the air, but no one wanted to voice it. It was like the footsteps had been loud enough to cause concern in the way you might think, but the way they'd stopped so abruptly, and the door slamming shut had us all on edge. We opened the front door and stepped outside into the pitch black night. There was nothing. No head torches from anyone nearby. No sound of anyone walking around. Not even an animal in the distance. This was a remote spot, miles away from any roads, so it's not like someone was going to just wander by, especially at that hour. We thought maybe there was someone camping nearby. Maybe someone who'd pitched up a tent and wandered in, thinking the bothy might have a toilet or something. But there was nothing. No trace of anyone at all. Just the cold night air and the howling wind. We stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of anyone else being there. We couldn't even hear the faintest footstep, not even a distant shout. There was nothing. After a few minutes of standing in the dark like idiots, we went back inside and locked the door. The whole thing felt off, but we tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind, or some strange noise from the house settling. The weird part, the next morning when we were packing up, we found out that this bothy was apparently well known for strange occurrences. A local told us that many people who had stayed there reported hearing footsteps when no one was around, or even feeling like they were being watched. The more I thought about it, the weirder it got. I'm not really a believer in ghosts or anything, but I couldn't help but feel there was something off about that night. It wasn't just the footsteps or the door slamming. It was the silence afterward, how everything went still, and how we couldn't find anyone nearby. It's one of those things that messes with your mind, and it's hard to explain. I've stayed in plenty of remote places before, and never once had something like that happen. I've heard people talk about the energy in certain places in the Highlands, but I'd always dismissed it as superstition. Now, though, I don't know. That night made me reconsider. Anyway, I'm not saying it was definitely a ghost or something, but there was something very strange about that night. It's probably just the isolation messing with our heads, but honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. If you ever stay at this body, keep an ear out. You might just hear something that you can't explain either. I'm a long-distance hiker. I've hiked the entire JMT twice in both directions. I have hiked many miles of the Pacific Crest Trail, as well as numerous random trips in my time in the outdoors. I have probably a year of collective time sleeping outside in the wilderness, and have hiked over 2,000 miles collectively. I have only managed to encounter 2 bears, some coyotes. I have smelled a mountain lion and heard one chirping near me. I'm not a big believer in cryptids and such, but I have a story that makes me question that. In 2022, I hiked the John Muir Trail in the Sierra Nevada in California. It is a long-distance hiking trail that spans 211 miles from the Yosemite Valley to Mount Whitney and takes about a month to complete. The trail is remote and located in some of the most amazing, untouched nature the country has to offer. I hiked the previous year in a traditional southbound direction, and in 2022, I hiked the trail northbound towards Yosemite with my wife and a female friend of ours. This story is on that 2022 trip. One day, about halfway through our trip, when the afternoon was getting ready to end, we decided to camp in a place called Grouse Meadows. The previous year, I enjoyed fishing here, and the gentle river that curves back and forth through the meadows makes a nice place to swim and filter water. We started to make camp for the night, and I noticed a large buck about 10 yards from us staring at us. It then started approaching, and I started to yell at it just to get it away. It circled around us a bit and then left us back down the way it came from. I decided I was going to catch a few fish before the sun went down, and maybe we would have some fish tacos for the night. The girls agreed and said they would finish making camp. We split a 3-person tent, so it was easy. As I went down toward the small river in the meadow, there was a large rock near where we were camping. It was about the size of a 2-car garage, and about that tall as well, large enough you couldn't see over it. When I passed it, I noticed a young man come walking around it in my direction. I was surprised because by this time, most people are already getting camp ready as it gets cold and dark fast in the Sierra. I was also a bit confused on where he had come from, as he was not on a trail. He was just walking straight through a meadow with a river running through it, away from any trail. As he got closer, I noticed he was only wearing a small day pack, blue running shorts, and a white t-shirt, all completely clean. That may not sound strange, but when you are multiple days away from any trailhead that leads out of the mountain, it sure is strange. I was kind of walking away from him toward the river, but it seemed like he was following me, so I stopped and said, "Hey man, how's it going?" He replied with, "Hello," in a very plain, monotone voice. He then asked me in the same voice, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm going fishing, haha," I replied. As if it wasn't obvious, I have a rod and reel in my hand. He didn't laugh. As he kept following, he said, "What will you do with the fish?" If it's big enough and not pregnant, I'm gonna eat it, I said. At this point, I'd stopped by a little beach on the side of the river, and he passed by me, and I felt relief. He seemed off to me. But then, just when he was about 20 feet past me, he stopped and turned around along the beach and squatted down and watched me fish. Eventually, I pulled one in, and it was a good size, and I prepared to clean it. And just as I pulled the guts out of the fish, he said, "How does it taste?" And I looked over at him, waiting to hear a joke or something, and he was smiling. A terrible feeling came over me, like that hair on your neck type of feeling. I said, "Well, I have to clean it first, man, and then cook it, you know?" I said it in a way that would have come off to normal people as, "I'm done talking to you, fuck off" type of way. I stuck my knife in the sand in front of me and didn't put it away. The man after a while said, "I'm hiking 30 miles today." "That's nice. Have fun, man," I replied. And he just stood up and walked off into the meadow towards a tree line, not on or near any trail, and vanished into the woods. I went back to camp and didn't really say anything to the girls because I didn't want to scare them. The night came in, we ate and went to bed, and I mostly forgot about it. I wake up. I felt woken up. I noticed both girls sitting up, and my wife said, "There is something there." I was so tired, I just said, "No, there isn't. Go to bed, guys." I laid down, and so did the girls, and within seconds, we heard a very fast shuffling sound. I sat up, and so did the girls. I said, "Oh yeah, there's definitely something there." I use a small foam sitting mat outside my inner tent in the vestibule for shoes at night, and to sit on during the day, and I saw it moving and could feel it moving. Something was literally right outside the tent. I grabbed my headlamp and our bear spray, and with my heart exploding out of my chest, I zipped open the tent, ready to battle whatever was there. And there was nothing. Not even a distant sound. It was dead silent, like ear-ringing silent. "Maybe a squirrel or something, or that buck," I said. We laid down, and this ended up happening like 7 more times. Every time, nothing. Eventually I started to actually pass out because of how exhausted I was, and I only remember cursing at it as I went to sleep. I woke up again, and I looked over, and both my wife and our friend were asleep. I heard the sound again, and I got the bear spray and got myself ready. I then worked up my courage. I zipped open the tent, and there he was, about 15 feet away, the same guy on all fours in an almost push-up-like position, staring directly at me with that same face. It was completely silent. Then he crawled backwards into the dark with a speed I can't explain. I woke up. I was so relieved it was a dream. In the morning, I told them I dreamed there was something at the tent, and they looked at me like I was joking. Our friend said, "Yeah, there was. You didn't dream that." My heart sank. "What about that guy?" I asked. "What guy?" They replied. They only remember seeing that guy down with me by the river. So he was real, even if it was just a dream that he visited the tent. They also recalled not understanding why they fell asleep so fast when something was outside, and that they felt like there was a blank in their memory before going to sleep. We all agreed that there was a general feeling that was just off in that place. I don't really tell this story because it sounds fake and stupid to me when I say it to myself, but it is real. I will never sleep in that meadow again. Alright, I I've been meaning to share this story for a while. It happened when I was 15 years old, on a Boy Scout packing trip in the Grand Teton Wilderness in Wyoming. Looking back, I can't believe how dumb we were. But it's also one of those experiences that still gets talked about in my friend group to this day. So, here's how it went down. It was one of those trips where you feel like you're truly out in the wild, surrounded by the rugged beauty of Wyoming. My buddy and I were stoked for a weekend of hiking, fishing, and whatever adventures came our way. But we were also a couple of teenage boys who didn't exactly follow all the rules of camping. Rule number 1, don't bring food into your tent. Guess who ignored that? Yeah, that would be us. We were deep in the Grand Teton Wilderness, a remote, rugged area with jagged peaks and pristine lakes. It was a perfect spot to get away from civilization and do some real wilderness camping. After a long day of hiking, we were both pretty beat, but we still had a lot of energy. So, as we usually did, we decided to sneak a few snacks into the tent. We settled in, ate our snacks, and the next couple of hours just chatted and laughed, talking about everything and nothing. As time went on, the dark wilderness outside our tent felt more and more isolated. The sounds of the wind through the trees, the distant calls of birds, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush made it feel like we were really far from civilization. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, we started hearing heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, and deep. It sounded like something was walking around our campsite, moving closer and closer to the tent. I'm not talking about the usual nighttime rustling from small animals. These were big steps. Thud, thud, thud. Then came the digging sounds, like claws scraping against dirt. It was followed by this heavy breathing, like something was standing right outside our tent, trying to catch its breath. At one point, I could feel my heart rate start to spike. My buddy looked at me, wide-eyed, and I could tell he was just as freaked out as I was. We didn't say anything for a second, both of us frozen in place, terrified that some big predator, maybe a bear or something, had found our food stash. We'd heard the stories about bears breaking into campsites, and now here we were, hearing these sounds way too close for comfort. We had a lot of jerky in the tent, and it suddenly felt like the worst decision we'd ever made. We were convinced we were going to die. The worst part, we knew better. We knew the rule about keeping food out of the tent, but we'd been lazy and let our guard down. I think we were both too embarrassed to admit how scared we were, but we were so scared. We almost started crying, honestly. We had no idea what we were dealing with, but we knew one thing for sure. We'd messed up, and now we were going to pay the price. After what felt like an eternity of panicking, we realized we had to do something. We couldn't just lay there and wait to be eaten. So, we mustered up every ounce of courage we had left, which wasn't much, and decided to take action. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking, and slowly unzipped the tent just a crack. When I peeked outside with the flashlight, I'll never forget what I saw. A herd of elk. It wasn't just one elk, it was a whole group of them, grazing around our campsite, completely oblivious to the fact that we were in the tent, freaking out. A couple of the bulls were within 10 feet from us. Their massive, antlered silhouettes were highlighted by the flashlight, and for a second, they looked like possessed demons. The way their antlers stuck out, casting long shadows, made them look like something straight out of a nightmare. At that moment, we both just stared, stunned, trying to process what was happening. The breathing, the footsteps, the digging sounds, it was just elk being, well, elk. They were probably digging around for food or just sniffing around the campsite. But to us, in that moment, they were terrifying. After a few seconds, we both started laughing hysterically. A mix of relief and sheer nervous energy. I mean, here we were, thinking we were going to get mauled by some wild animal, only to find out it was a bunch of elk just doing their thing. We were that close to having a full-on meltdown over a herd of harmless animals. The elk eventually wandered off, and we calmed down a bit, but the lesson was learned. We were lucky this time. We definitely didn't want to be the idiots who made the mistake of tempting wildlife with food in our tent. That night, we packed all the leftover snacks outside and secured everything properly. We didn't sleep much after that, though. Our hearts were still racing, and I'm sure both of us were half expecting some other weird, wild thing to happen. But at least we weren't about to be elk victims. To this day, we still joke about that night. Every time I think about it, I can't help but laugh at how scared we were over something so simple and silly. But I can also admit that barbecue beef jerky night in that tent will always be one of the most terrifying, ridiculous experiences of my life. So, if you're ever out in the wild, make sure you never bring food into your tent at night. Trust me, you don't want to have a possession-like encounter with a herd of elk. Stay safe out there, folks. I've got a story about an encounter that still gives me chills, and I've been debating whether or not to share it. But I'm hoping it'll help someone to stay aware of their surroundings, especially when they're out in nature, alone. This happened when I was in my early 20s, just out hiking with my dog. I've always loved hiking alone. My sweet but protective girl was always by my side. Her presence was my comfort and my safety. I was about 30 minutes out on the trail, just enjoying the solitude of the woods, the kind of peacefulness that only comes when you're far from any roads or any busy areas. We were on a well-traveled but quiet trail. The sun was just starting to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows, and it felt like the world was completely still. But then, things took a weird turn. I noticed a group of guys, maybe 4 or 5 of them, coming up the trail towards me. It wasn't unusual to run into other hikers, but as they got closer, I could smell beer. I could smell the alcohol on them from a distance. They were a bit loud, definitely buzzed, but they didn't seem aggressive. At least not at first. I wasn't super comfortable, but I figured they were just out for a hike, having a good time. I stepped off to the side of the trail to let them pass, and continued walking with my dog by my side. Then one of them passed me and suddenly stopped, just standing there like he was waiting for something. At this point, 3 more guys were coming downhill toward me. They weren't moving quickly, but they weren't exactly friendly either. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That's when one of them broke off from the group and started walking uphill behind us, off the trail. At first, I thought he was just stepping off to take a leak, but he didn't. He stopped a few feet off the trail, almost like he was pretending to look for something. My dog immediately put her hackles up. This was the first time I'd ever seen her do that in such a calm environment. Normally, she was the kind of dog who loved attention, always wagging her tail and jumping up to lick anyone who passed us on the trail. But this was different. She pressed herself into my leg, not moving, not even trying to get my attention, and then she growled, a low, guttural growl that I've never heard from her before. It wasn't like the playful growl she did when she was feeling cheeky. This was deep and primal, something that told me she sensed danger. I was on high alert at this point. I had always trusted my dog's instincts. If she was sensing something, I knew it was time to be cautious. I reached for my bear spray instinctively, unclipping it fast and holding it in my hand. I've carried it on hikes before, through bear country, but I never thought I'd need it for a group of people. But something about the situation felt wrong. The guy behind us wasn't moving, and I could feel the tension in the air. The guy who had passed me earlier and stopped hollered something, but I didn't catch all of it. His words were muffled, but I heard enough to know that he was trying to say something to the others. Suddenly, the guy who had peeled off and went uphill started coming back down the trail, slowly. All of the guys began moving off. They didn't make any immediate threats, and none of them physically approached us, but the whole situation felt off. My dog was still staring intently at the trail behind us, her eyes locked onto them for what felt like minutes. She wasn't moving, her body rigid, still not shifting her gaze. Finally, after what felt like forever, she relaxed a bit, but she never took her eyes off the trail until they were out of sight. It was like she was keeping watch, ensuring they weren't going to do anything. I still hadn't leashed her. She never moved to greet anyone, and I had no need to pull her in, which was unusual. Normally, when people passed us, she was more than happy to get attention, maybe jump up or just wag her tail excitedly. But not this time. She was still glued to my side, never letting her guard down for a second. Once they were out of sight, we continued down the trail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I just narrowly avoided something potentially dangerous. I kept my guard up the rest of the way back, but thankfully, the rest of the hike was uneventful. I can't explain what would have happened if my dog hadn't reacted the way she did. Maybe the guys were just a little too drunk and didn't realize they were making me uncomfortable. Maybe they were just curious and decided to follow me. But there's something in my gut that tells me that they weren't just out for a hike. They could have been looking to harass me, or worse. The guy who peeled off behind us never actually did anything except make me feel uneasy. But when your dog reacts like that, growling, pressing herself into you, it's not something you can easily ignore. I will never forget that feeling of being surrounded with no immediate way to escape. I've heard stories before of hikers being followed or harassed on trails, but I never thought I'd be in a situation like that. If you ever find yourself alone on a trail, especially if you're out in more remote areas, just stay alert. People don't always have the best intentions, and there are predators out there in more ways than one. And trust your dog. They'll sense it before you do. All right, buckle up, because this was one of the most surreal and terrifying experiences I've ever had, and I've got to share it. A few months ago, I went on a backpacking trip with a buddy of mine to climb Mount Hood in Oregon. It's one of those classic, iconic peaks, and we were both stoked. The mountain is absolutely stunning, with glaciers, alpine meadows, and incredible views. Exactly the kind of place you want to challenge yourself. But, like most things in life, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Oh no. This hike turned into a wild ride, and I'll be telling this story for the rest of my life. So, here's where it all went sideways. We're coming up over Hood Summit, which sits at an altitude of about 11,240 feet. The climb had been grueling, but we were almost there, feeling the excitement of finally reaching the summit before descending into the beautiful meadows below. Now, here's the kicker. We decided to enjoy the moment a little differently. About 30 minutes before we got to the top, We ate some pretty strong mushrooms. We weren't exactly trying to trip, but we figured it might add some depth to the whole experience, bring us closer to the mountain, the sky, and all that, you know? Hiker's high, right? Well, we were in for something far more intense than we anticipated. The thing is, at Mount Hood, there's literally no cover. It's just snow, rock, and ice as far as the eye can see. No trees, no shrubs, nothing to hide behind. The kind of place where you feel like you're standing on top of the world. And when we finally crested the summit, the views were unbelievable. Except, of course, for the massive thunderclouds that suddenly came into view. We had no idea they were coming before. The weather had been perfect up until that point, but as soon as we topped the pass, the altitude hit me hard. Combined with the mushrooms, I was already starting to feel nauseous and dizzy. And then, bam, thunder. The kind of crackling thunder that makes your bones vibrate. Now, the mushrooms were starting to kick in at full force, and the altitude sickness was hitting me like a ton of bricks. I felt like my brain was in overdrive, and my body was completely off balance. I could see the storm rolling in fast, the thunder growing louder, and the dark clouds hanging ominously over us. I turned to my buddy, and I swear, for a moment, I thought I saw the storm literally swirling around us. Maybe it was the mushrooms, maybe it was the altitude, but everything felt wrong. The air was thick, and the world just felt off. At this point, we had to make the decision to descend. We still had about 3 miles of switchbacks down the mountain face before we'd be out of the storm's immediate path and into some cover. But the wind was picking up, and I swear to God, every time there was a clap of thunder, I felt like I might get struck. I could barely keep my balance, feeling nauseous and overwhelmed by the whole thing. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going to die up here. It's going to be a lightning strike. I could literally feel the tension in the air, and the fact that I was completely exposed on top of a mountain made the whole situation even worse. My mind was racing, and everything around me was amplified. The shrooms were making everything seem even more intense. The world was swirling, and I just wanted to get off that mountain as quickly as possible. Luckily, after what felt like an eternity, the storm seemed to pivot and shift. Instead of coming directly at us, it moved off in another direction. The thunder started to fade, and the pressure on my chest lifted. We still got caught in some light rain, but it was nothing compared to what it could have been. Honestly, though, for the next hour, I was just relieved to be moving down the mountain, getting closer to safety. But the feeling of sketchy as fuck didn't wear off until we reached some lower ground, well away from the exposed summit. By the time we made it down, my head was still spinning from the mushrooms and the altitude, but I was also incredibly grateful. That could have gone a lot worse. There's a reason why people tell you not to mess around with storms in the mountains. It's easy to forget when you're up there, lost in the beauty of it all. But nature can turn on you in an instant. We made it to the meadows below in one piece, and after a while, the effects of the mushrooms wore off, thankfully. We had some time to reflect on what had just happened. That moment on top of Mount Hood was one of the scariest experiences of my life. I never thought I'd be up there, tripping, feeling like I was on the verge of death from lightning, thinking I was this close to a disaster. In the end, it turned out okay. We didn't get hit by lightning, we didn't get swept away by the storm, and we lived to tell the tale. But I'll never forget that hour of sheer panic, the crazy visual distortions, and the overwhelming feeling that I was absolutely not in control of the situation. So yeah, I learned a few things that day. The mountains are beautiful, but they're also dangerous as hell. And if you're ever thinking about doing something similar, maybe don't combine altitude sickness, thunderstorms, and strong mushrooms. It'll make for one hell of a story. But I can tell you firsthand, it's not the kind of adventure you want to sign up for. So this happened a couple of months ago, and I'm still kind of weirded out by it. I thought I'd share it because, well, it was one of the strangest things I've ever encountered while on a solo camping trip. I had planned a quick solo overnighter in the wilds of the Adirondacks, just my dog and I, to test out some new gear. I was looking for a remote section of trail, something off the beaten path without the usual crowds of hikers or scenic viewpoints. This was the type of area that wasn't popular. No water points, no shelters, no overlooks, just miles of dense forest with a rarely traveled trail winding through it. The closest trailhead was about 10 miles away, so it wasn't like I was going to bump into anyone. It was a late fall trip, so the weather was starting to cool down, and the sun was setting earlier than usual. After a few hours of hiking, I decided to move off trail and set up camp. I found a small clearing, maybe 50 feet wide, surrounded by dense trees, and a small stream running nearby. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it offered a nice, quiet spot to camp. I moved about 300 yards off the trail into a small, secluded area, completely out of sight of the main trail, which made me feel pretty good about the whole setup. It was peaceful, quiet, and remote. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and it had been dark for a few hours at this point. I had a tiny fire going, just enough to keep some warmth and light in my little camp, and I was curled up in my hammock reading a book. My dog, a pretty chill and well-behaved dog, was lying beside me, snoring contentedly. Everything was calm, or so I thought. Out of nowhere, my dog suddenly jolted awake. I'm talking full alert, ears up, staring intensely at something. He stood up, his body stiffened, and I could see the hackles on his back raise. Now, my dog isn't one to get skittish or bark at every little thing. He's pretty laid back, but something had clearly caught his attention. I didn't hear anything at first, so I figured maybe he was just reacting to some small noise or movement in the woods. But then he started growling. Low, slow growls, almost like a warning. My heart rate went up a bit because at that point, I knew something wasn't right. I immediately got out of my hammock, grabbed my headlamp, and shone it in the direction my dog was staring at, toward the tree line just beyond the clearing. At first, I didn't see anything. It was pitch black, and the beam of my headlamp didn't reach far enough to illuminate the area. I took a few cautious steps toward the edge of the clearing, squinting into the darkness, and then, bam, there he was, a man, a middle-aged guy, standing at the edge of the woods, just staring at me. I honestly don't even know how long he'd been there, but he had to have been standing still for a while, because when I saw him, he didn't even flinch at the light. He was wearing a camo jacket, hood up. Odd, since it wasn't cold enough for it to make much sense. Just standing there, completely still, staring at me like I was some kind of oddity. I'll admit, I froze for a second. I wasn't sure what to do. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, 10 miles from the nearest trailhead, and this guy is just standing there. It didn't make sense. I decided to speak up, mostly out of instinct. I called out, "Hey, hi, everything okay?" I didn't expect him to respond, but I figured I'd at least try. He didn't say a word, not a single sound. He just kept staring at me for what felt like a long time, at least 15 seconds, long enough for me to feel like something was seriously off. Then, without saying a word or even acknowledging me in any way, he turned around slowly and just walked back into the woods like nothing happened. I stood there, dumbfounded, my dog still growling softly and looking in the direction the guy had gone. I waited a few minutes, hoping he'd come back or I'd hear some sound. But nothing. Complete silence. It was like he just vanished into the night. I ended up staying awake for a little while longer, listening for any more noises or signs that someone was out there, but nothing else happened. The fire crackled. My dog eventually calmed down, and the night returned to its eerie, quiet normal. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I packed up camp and headed back to the trailhead, constantly looking over my shoulder. I kept thinking about that guy, how he just appeared out of nowhere, didn't say a word, and vanished just as easily. I've done plenty of solo trips before, but I've never had anything that strange happen. Anyway, that's my creepy solo camping story. Maybe I'll never know who that guy was or what he was doing out there, but it definitely left me with a weird feeling. I'm not sure if I'll be heading back to that spot anytime soon, that's for sure. Has anyone else had a similar encounter out there? Just some random, silent person in the woods? I'd love to hear your stories, if you have any. One or 2 months ago, my girlfriend and I went out to our favorite bar. The drive is a tad longer than an hour to our place from the bar, primarily on barren interstate after the first 15 minutes, save for a few rural exits and one rest stop a little over halfway home. My girlfriend was sober that night and was driving. I had a bit to drink and was feeling all warm and tipsy. I asked my girlfriend to make a quick stop at the rest area so I could pee, thanks to the beer. This is a normal stop for us to make if one of us has been drinking, since the area has its own direct exit and entrance, so it's faster than taking an actual exit into a town for a gas station. The rest area has only one road in and one out, and it's surrounded by trees to the point that you can't see the facility from the freeway. It has wooded walking trails. By the time I hopped out of the car at the rest stop, it was around 3 a.m. As mentioned, this is a fairly regular stop, and until that day, the only other person I'd seen in that rest stop around that time of night was the guy who maintains it. I walk in. The vending area is empty and completely silent. I make my way over to the men's room and push it open, to be immediately startled by this old man, maybe mid-60s or so, standing immediately to the left of the door inside the bathroom. He was wearing what I can only describe as an Inspector Gadget coat and slacks. I noticed he had a cell phone in his hand when I opened the door, but it was hanging down at his side, and the screen was not lit up. He stares at me, and I stare back for a split second. Then I get over it and pass him to head over to the urinals. I take the urinal closest to the sink, when I notice he made no indication he was going to walk out, because there's basically a wall of mirrors stretched out far enough that I can watch him in the mirror while I'm at the urinal. I unzip and keep my eyes on the mirror, but make sure not to turn my head at all. By the time I look in the mirror, his phone is up in his hand and on as if he were texting, but he seems to be staring at me rather than the phone. Either way, he definitely was not looking at his phone. A very long 60 seconds pass, and I absolutely cannot piss, with this silent guy staring at my back from the door. Then in the mirror, I notice him take a small slow step forward. I tell myself I'm just tipsy and imagining it, to just get on with my piss and get the fuck out of there. Then he takes a more obvious step forward, and I put it in my pants while I speed walk over to the back handicap stall and lock the door. I went to the back where my feet weren't visible and I texted my girlfriend about the creepy guy inside with me. I sit and wait to hear the door open, signaling him leaving, but it still doesn't. After possibly the longest 8 minutes of my life, I hear the door open and close. I wait another 2 minutes and finally pee, still being in the same stall. I crack the stall door first. Luckily the bathroom isn't huge, and I had almost complete visibility of the room from the stall I picked. I saw no signs of anyone else, so I walked out, washed my hands, and beelined it back to the parking lot. I finally make it back to the car and ask my girlfriend what car the old guy got into. She turns to me wide-eyed and says, "He didn't get into one. He just walked across the parking lot and went into the tree line." With the rest stop being the only thing on the very short on and off ramps, and the other closest civilization being 5 miles away by interstate, I don't know where that guy was going. Later what I realized is although the rest area main room is small, there is a second entrance/exit on the side that goes to the patio backing up to the woods. I forget about it, being as I've never used it, but if that guy had somehow managed to get a jump on me, he easily could have pulled me out of that door, and my girlfriend wouldn't have seen it. I don't know if that was his plan, and I ruined it when I made my dash for the stall. But regardless, old man creeping in the rest stop bathroom in the wee hours. Let's not meet again. When I was 12, I lived in a small town where drugs were a pretty big issue. It didn't help that my parents moved into a house that was also on the side of town where a lot of crime was. One day, my mom and I got into a massive argument. There were only 14 years between us, so our fights got out of hand sometimes. She and my little sister decided to go to the store to blow off some steam. About an hour later, I went into the kitchen to pour myself some tea. Just so it isn't confusing, in the next part, our kitchen was attached to our front door. When you walked into the house, you'd immediately be facing the kitchen table and the fridge. I was standing at the table pouring myself a glass when I heard walking up to the door. I figured it was my mom coming back because she'd been gone for an hour already. I didn't look up until I heard our front screen door open very slowly. My family always flung that door open, so I knew something was off. When I looked up, I was staring at a very tall, unkempt man who was smiling at me while holding the door handle. People always say their fight or flight kicks in, but I experienced something more horrifying. I froze. He kept eye contact with me while he slowly opened the door. My mom didn't lock it when she left, and I couldn't move, and my mind wasn't processing anything until I heard snarling. I looked down just in time to see my long-haired German shepherd, Dante, go into full attack mode. This scared the guy and I. He took off the other way off of our porch, but he didn't shut the door. I then realized I was standing in an empty kitchen because my dog went after him. I finally regained feeling in my legs and took off after my dog, screaming for him to come back. He started running back just as my mom pulled up and asked how he got loose. When I told her what happened, she went pale and called the police. I gave a statement, but nothing ever came of it. So, to the guy who tried to break into my house and do God knows what, my dog would gladly still like to meet you. I wanted to share a personal story that happened to me when I was about 6 years old. I remember it clear as day, but first a little context. My mom is an ER nurse and often had to work a full weekend shift. When she did, she always took me to my friend Sarah. Sarah and I were the same age, Plus her family had a huge yard, as well as her many siblings and farm animals to run and play with. Her dad was a big burly guy who kept 3 guard dogs that would patrol their land at night. This night was different. I arrived as normal, excited to hang out with Sarah, and we ran around looking for her barn cats. I noticed that we didn't run into any of her siblings, and when I asked Sarah, she shrugged and said they weren't at home. I didn't think much of it at the time, and spent the rest of the evening playing. Nighttime soon fell, and it came time for bed. Sarah had this bunk bed I loved to sleep in. She always let me climb to the top. She knew I loved looking outside the window in the morning, because I could see the area where the dogs were kept, since we were not allowed to go near the dogs. This was the only time I could see them. I fell asleep rather quickly from the day's activities, until I got this feeling that something wasn't right. I opened my eyes to see a small boy dressed in a white t-shirt and button-down overalls, or as I call them, bibs. He looked to be about 5. We stared at each other for a while. Reassuring myself that it was one of her siblings, I told him to go back to sleep, that it wasn't time to play. He looked blankly at me, and eventually turned around before running off into the dark hallway. I laid back down. I soon fell back asleep. But sometime later, I woke again, when I felt something kind of jiggle my foot. Thinking it was Sarah, I looked at the end of my bed to see the little boy again, looking over the last rail of the ladder at me. I leaned over the side of the bed, trying to wake Sarah, but no luck. She was a heavy sleeper. I was mad that this little boy woke me up again, so I took a small toy I had brought with me and handed it to him with a stern face and told him, "It's nighttime. It's time for bed. We will get into trouble if your dad sees you awake." He looked at me with a sad expression as though he understood. He slowly climbed down the ladder and went running off again. I woke up just before daybreak, with the barest light peeking through the blinds. But it was strangely silent. The dogs usually always barked or made some kind of noise, but there was no sound. Not even the birds were singing, where they could usually be heard from the small patch of woodland. As I moved the blinds, I saw the boy again running through her yard into the woods. Feeling that something wasn't right, I jostled my friend awake. As she sat up groggily, I told her what happened, about her brother running into the woods. She looked at me with confusion. "It's just us and my dad here," she said. My heart dropped into my stomach, but I said nothing, and I didn't bring it up for the rest of the morning. When my mom picked me up, she told me I wouldn't be able to see Sarah anymore. Her mom and dad had divorced, and it was Sarah's last weekend there, until she moved in with her mom and siblings. That's why no one was home in the afternoon. But it didn't explain the boy or the dogs going eerily quiet. To this day, I don't know who that boy was or what he wanted from me, but I often wonder what would have happened if I had gotten up and followed him out to play. This happened to me 15 years ago when I was 17. I've never managed to find any sort of explanation behind it. I live in Scotland. I went for a run around a loop, which went from my village around a tarmac road, around 4 miles, and then back to the village. It passed through farms, woods, and a few remote houses on the route. It was mid-December, around 5 p.m., so it wasn't daylight. However, it wasn't entirely dark. I was about 2.5 miles into the run with my headphones on. As I was running, there was a long old farm building to my right, a field behind a hedge on the left, then the woods either side of the road about 200 meters beyond this. I saw a man walking towards me. He had his head down, a beanie hat on, a dull-looking jacket. He had a particular build, similar to one of my friends, Ross. He was just under 6 foot, broad shoulders, not fat but built. As I got closer, he moved into the shadows of the farm building to my right. so I pulled my headphones off as it was strange. I slowed to a walk as I was around 10 meters away and found that he was gone. The wall was sandstone, but there was an old doorway which was previously bricked up. There weren't any other doors. Once I thought I'd seen a ghost. I had the option to run back to a house who I knew the owners of, or run through the road with the woods either side. I quickly decided I couldn't go to someone's house, as I'd look really weird. So I ran home via the woods. I told my mother about this when I got home. She said I must have hallucinated or whatever else, and she didn't believe me. The next day she was at work and told her workmates the story. At the end of the story, one of her co-workers pulled her aside to ask what the person had looked like. She told him he was built like Ross, who everyone knew. My mother's co-worker went white and explained that her husband's father had been cremated that day and used to walk from the waterworks along that road to his house each night after work. I saw in the newspaper a couple days later a statement saying Jimmy had been cremated that day. I've been back many times since and never seen anything similar. Never move in with a man or woman you've never personally known. I got a roommate from hell this way. The man tortured me psychologically when I turned his sexual advances down, then stole thousands of dollars from me over time. He even used my Amazon account to open up an account. He got some of my personal information like social security as well. Once I left after calling the cops to help me leave. He showed up at the Apple store I was at just a day after I left. Even though I left to go live on the streets, no family or friends, as I was severely abused as a kid. I've been on my own since 14 actually, so I'm accustomed to living on the streets for periods of time. I was a million times happier than I ever was in his nice apartment, surrounded by nice things and a fancy car. I felt so relieved even just living in a concrete garage. I was a million times happier sleeping on concrete with a pillow made of a towel and a tiny little blanket in the cold and heat than I ever was living there with him. He spent his time psychologically torturing me, and I don't regret leaving at all. He would bang on the wall across from mine every morning and late at night to startle me awake. He'd throw pebbles or tap on my window in the middle of the night to scare me and keep me on edge. He'd give me weird little candies and teddy bears as if we were dating. He even ordered stalkerish love items from my own Amazon account. Who the fuck spends this much on a Christmas ornament that says, "I'll always love and follow you," or something along those lines? If I'd go to the restroom, he'd run and kick his foot at the door so loud and suddenly that it sounded like a door being kicked down. He'd steal my items if I left them alone for even a second, so I'd have no way to go out if I had plans. Then he'd put them back once I mentioned them, or when it was too late for me to leave for my plans. This is how he kept me inside. If I got any mail or a package, he'd interrogate me. "What did you order? I need to know." Like he owned me or something. Towards the end, I was leaning furniture and myself up against the door, because he had previously picked my bedroom lock before while I was gone. And when I'd wake up sometimes, there was stuff missing or moved in odd ways, so I knew he was creeping around while I slept. He was an absolute freak. I wouldn't put anything past him since he showed me how psychotic he was. If I was happy or in a good mood, he'd start criticizing and nitpicking at my body, hair, face, behavior, voice, or whatever else. Anything that he thought I was insecure about. I even developed an ED because he did this and mocked and laughed at me when I would make or eat food. Anytime I'd leave my bedroom, he would rush out of his room to stand right behind or near me, like a weird little dog that follows you around panting. He'd even piss in my hair products, skincare products, vitamins, and whatever else. He'd throw out food I just bought, steal my cash, and even use my debit cards. He even ordered 30 to 40 plus items off my Amazon account without my knowledge or consent. It was the strangest thing. If anyone else had to deal with this, they'd go insane. I still have trouble believing this stuff happened, as it was just so crazy to even think that someone is that crazy to do this. So, I was reading through a Reddit post earlier today that sounded like it came straight out of a spooky story, and I was really ready to roll my eyes and laugh it off as just another wannabe writer trying to spin a tale. But then something about it hit a little too close to home, and I couldn't just ignore it. It was a little too similar to something that happened to me a few years ago, and honestly, it still freaks me out a bit. I was camping in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania, which is known for being kind of remote and dense, so there's a decent amount of isolation there. I was with my 12-year-old son, who, by the way, is a seriously seasoned camper for his age, packs all his own gear, knows how to start a fire, the works, and also my dad, who is older and, let's just say, not as much of a wilderness enthusiast. It was one of those trips where we decided to keep it simple and just spend a night or two in the woods to reconnect, you know? Nothing extravagant. Anyway, we get to the campsite, set up the tents, and did the usual routine. By the time the sun had dipped below the trees, we were all pretty tired. My son was already asleep in his tent, and I didn't last much longer. I remember falling asleep as soon as it got dark. The kind of deep sleep where you're out for the count and nothing could wake you. But then, in the very early morning, I'm talking like way before sunrise, I woke up. I didn't look at the time, but you know that feeling you get when the air is really still, almost dead? That's the best way I can describe it. Like the world is holding its breath, just waiting for something to happen. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining things. It sounded like someone was knocking two big thick branches together like knock, knock, knock. And it wasn't some random sound. It was way too rhythmic, almost deliberate. Definitely not an animal, and definitely not anything natural. I lay there listening, trying to make sense of it. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. A few minutes later, the same thing. Knock, knock, knock again. This happened 3 times. I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no voices, no rustling of leaves. Just that strange rhythmic knocking. It wasn't close enough to where I thought someone was walking around the campsite, but it was definitely close enough that I could hear it clearly. It sounded far off, but I don't know. Something about it just gave me a chill. It was like the air itself had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't say anything at first. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just didn't want to freak out my son, or maybe I just didn't know what to make of it. I spent a good couple of hours just laying there, trying to convince myself it was something harmless. Maybe a couple of deer sparring, or maybe some idiot campers messing around in the middle of the night. But the rhythmic nature of the sound stuck with me. It was just odd. So, of course, my mind immediately started going wild. I grabbed my phone, in an attempt to reassure myself, I guess, and started Googling possible explanations. Maybe it was some deer antlers clashing. Could it be some kind of nocturnal animal doing something strange? Maybe someone else was out there, trying to provoke a response from whatever creatures roam the forest at night. That's when I found the Bigfoot theories. Apparently some people believe that Bigfoot, yes really, will knock on trees or limbs in some kind of communication or as a warning. It's funny, right? I mean, I kind of laughed it off at first, I wasn't about to start believing in cryptids or whatever, but it did make me think. Could someone be out there trying to pull off some Bigfoot hunter antics, knocking on trees to see if they'd get a response? It seemed like a stretch, but after a couple of hours of Googling, it started to feel like a reasonable explanation for such a bizarre noise. I mean, who else would be out there in the middle of nowhere, knocking trees in the dead of night, right? I figured they were probably a few locals or enthusiasts who knew the area and were playing around, trying to lure whatever mythical creature they were chasing. The thought actually made me kind of chuckle. In some twisted way, it was like I was being trolled by a bunch of Bigfoot wannabes. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was so weirdly deliberate. It wasn't random, like some animal or nature noise. It was planned, intentional, and honestly, it was one of those things that made me second-guess everything I thought I knew about the woods. Long story short, the knocking stopped after the third round. I lay there wide awake for a while, listening for any other sounds. Nothing. Just the normal nighttime rustling of the forest. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. I didn't tell my dad or my son about it because, well, I didn't want to freak them out. But I did have a couple of thoughts that night. One, I figured that if I ever heard something like that again, I'd mess with it. Maybe knock back or do something to freak them out, just to see if I could get a response. I'd be ready next time, I told myself. But the truth is, I haven't heard anything like it since. And I've camped in that forest a few more times with my son. Nothing happened after that night. The only thing that changed was that every time I go camping now, I find myself listening a little more intently when the wind shifts or when the night gets too quiet. I guess the woods can be a little unsettling when you can't explain everything, no matter how hard you try. So yeah, maybe I was just getting paranoid. Maybe it was just some guys messing around. Or maybe it was something else. Who knows? Either way, that night sticks with me. I'm not saying it was anything supernatural, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little more cautious when I stepped into those woods now, just in case. This happened a few summers ago, and I swear to you, it was so creepy that I still get chills just thinking about it. I've always considered myself a pretty rational person, someone who doesn't easily spook. But after this, I don't think I'll ever look at a dark forest the same way again. It's long, but trust me, it's worth it. I've been feeling completely burned out by life for months. Work, family drama, social media noise, you name it. I was mentally exhausted and just needed some time to get away from everything. I've always been a fan of camping, and I figured there's no better way to unplug than to go into the wilderness for a solo trip. No distractions, no people, just me and nature. Sounds peaceful, right? I know what you're probably thinking. Camping alone, really? And yes, I get it. I wasn't exactly doing myself any favors by venturing out into the middle of nowhere on my own. But the idea of total solitude and quiet just seemed like the perfect antidote to my stressed-out life. So I started looking for a remote, secluded spot, somewhere far off the beaten path. After some searching, I found a place on a wild camping app. No marked trails, no designated campsites, just an isolated patch of forest that looked perfect. The description said it was untouched wilderness with breathtaking views and complete peace and quiet. No other campers around, just a beautiful, isolated location with a view of the mountains. I thought to myself, this is it. This is the escape I need. I booked the spot and started planning my trip. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. Figured it was safer that way. I mean, who would want to know if I got lost or ended up in some crazy situation, right? Yeah, not my best decision, looking back. So, I get to this place late in the afternoon. The sun is starting to dip behind the trees, and the air feels cooler as the forest gradually becomes shaded. I'm surrounded by thick, ancient trees that seem to stretch on forever. There's this eerie quiet that sounds everything, the kind of quiet where you can barely hear your own heartbeat. I set up camp quickly, pitched my tent, built a small fire, and unpacked my things. The fire crackles in the quiet, and for a few moments, everything seems perfect. I'm alone in the woods, and it's exactly what I thought I needed. As the sky darkens and the sun sinks beneath the horizon, the world around me starts to change. The air feels thicker, almost oppressive, and that's when I realized something strange. It's way too quiet. There's not a sound to be heard. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, not even the rustling of leaves. Nothing. Just silence. I try not to let it bother me. I mean, maybe it's just the time of night, right? Maybe the animals are just resting. Still, it's unsettling, especially after coming from a busy city where there's always some noise in the background. I try to shrug it off and focus on the fire, which is now casting eerie shadows across the trees. I eat my dinner, trying to ignore the odd stillness, and soon I'm just sitting there, staring into the flames, letting the crackling sound calm my thoughts. But then, something weird happens. At first, it's barely noticeable. A soft creaking sound from somewhere in the forest, like wood bending under weight. I assume it's just a branch moving in the wind, or some animal making its way through the underbrush. But then, it happens again, and again. The creaking sound is louder this time, and it's louder. It sounds almost like footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my camp. I try to shake it off, thinking it's probably just an animal. But the longer it goes on, the more unsettling it becomes. It's not just random sounds anymore. It's a pattern, like something or someone is deliberately pacing around the perimeter of my camp, moving between the trees. I even start to hear the crunch of leaves underfoot. Now, I'm not the type to panic easily, but I won't lie. I felt my heart start to race. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed my flashlight, only to realize it was almost dead. I figured that was it. Whatever was out there could probably see me just fine, while I was left fumbling with my weak little flashlight. I'm not exactly a survival expert, and that thought did not sit well with me. Still, I figured the best thing to do would be to investigate. It could just be another camper or hiker who got lost, right? Or maybe a curious animal. Either way, I didn't want to spend the night wondering about it. So, I grabbed my flashlight and decided to walk deeper into the woods to see if I could find out what was going on. I walked away from my camp, trying to ignore the eerie feeling in the pit of my stomach. The deeper I got into the forest, the more the trees seemed to close in around me. The ground beneath my boots was squelchy and soft, almost like wet mud. Despite not having rained in days, it was as if the earth was swallowing up my steps, and with every passing moment, I felt more and more disoriented. The deeper I walked, the more the forest seemed to consume the light from my flashlight. The shadows grew larger, darker, and the trees seemed to shift and bend in strange ways. Every few steps, I would hear a snap of a twig or the sound of movement. Something was following me. Every time I turned to check, though, There was nothing, just darkness. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible, like a shadow between the trees. It was just a blur, too far for me to make out any details, but it was definitely there. A human shape. My heart stopped. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. But before I could take a step toward it, my body just reacted. I turned and bolted. I didn't look back. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I made my way back toward the camp. My flashlight was barely functioning now, just a weak beam of light cutting through the dark, and I kept hearing that sound, the sound of footsteps following me, matching my pace. I could feel the weight of something, or someone, on my heels, but I was too terrified to turn around and confirm it. When I finally made it back to my camp, I thought maybe I was just freaking myself out. But when I saw my tent, I froze again. My tent was open. The ropes had been untied. The flap was flapping loosely in the wind, and my sleeping bag was scattered across the ground. Everything was out of place, as if someone had rifled through my stuff. I felt completely exposed. There was no way I was going to be sleeping now. I stayed awake all night, lying in my sleeping bag, listening to every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves. I heard things move outside the camp, but nothing approached close enough for me to see clearly. It was just a constant, nerve-wracking sound of something out there, waiting. When the sun finally started to rise, I couldn't pack up my things fast enough. I left as quickly as I could, not bothering to finish breakfast or anything. I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't even stop to take a proper look at the campsite. I just wanted to put miles between me and that forest. And now, I still can't stop thinking about what happened. Was it just my imagination running wild? Did I get so stressed out and tired that I started to hallucinate? Or was there something out there? Something that wasn't supposed to be seen, or something that wanted me to leave? I'll never know, but I can tell you one thing for sure. I will never, ever camp alone in that forest again. So, to anyone who's thinking about camping in remote places, please, please be careful. There are things out there that we don't understand, and maybe it's better to leave them alone. And if anyone has had a similar experience or knows what could have been making those noises, please let me know. Take care, and trust me, stick to the more populated campsites if you value your sanity. During my first summer in BC in 2019, I traveled around for 3 months with Dora the Ford Explorer, my converted camper van. It was late September. Things had significantly slowed down in terms of tourism and travelers, and I often found myself the only person on the trails, in the backcountry, and in campgrounds, especially midweek. I had just camped a couple of days in a remote corner in Wells Gray Provincial Park, and decided to drive towards 100 Mile House, and from there, slowly make my way back south to head to Vancouver Island. As I was tired and the sunset was an hour away, I decided to turn off onto one of the dirt roads, drive another 30 minutes, and just park the car by one of the lakes I saw on my map. I witnessed an amazing sunset, heard wolves howl in the distance, and got a nice fire going to keep me warm. Once again, I felt this deep sense of bliss coming over me, as I had so many times that summer, when out in the middle of nowhere, by myself. I was enjoying my glass of wine, fire, and complete darkness around me, when I heard the humming sound of a car in the distance. Immediately, anxiety kicked in. For the very first time in those 3 months, I had covered about 4,500 kilometers with my Dora and had taken her on the craziest mountain roads, ran into so many different people on the trails, had wildlife encounters, and slept in the backcountry. But never have I ever felt this deep sense of fear before. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. This was a dead-end road, so chances were big that this car was going to stop here. I'm still amazed to this day at how anxiety makes your brain do weird things, because I suddenly had images of a creepy loner in a beaten-up truck that always had wanted to kill someone. And here I was, a solo woman in her early 30s, in the middle of nowhere, parked by the side of a random lake. While I always leave trip plans for hikes and backcountry roads, I had a bit of lax about letting people know where I'd camp for the night with Dora, so nobody would even know where I was. I heard the vehicle approaching and saw its lights through the trees. I ran to the back of my truck, grabbed my axe, closed all the doors, and crouched behind the dark side of Dora, away from the burning fire, so whoever was coming this way couldn't see me. There were several clearings around the lake, so I just hoped that this person would drive to the furthest side and leave me alone. I thought I was going to lose it, when the car literally pulled up next to Dora on the other side of the fire. For a second, I thought of just walking up there like I do any other day, just greeting a fellow camper that probably thought it would be nice to share the fire. But for some reason, I couldn't even move. All I could think was, don't expose yourself. In nanoseconds, I thought, which way should I run if I have to? And then, shit, it's so dark. I don't even think I can run through the trees without breaking my ankles or running into one. I heard the other car's door open and somebody stepping out of the car. By this time, I almost shit myself. I didn't want to make my presence known because I did not want this person to walk around my car and find me there, crouching on the floor with my axe. So I decided to open the driver's door, and then I slammed my door shut again really hard, thinking it would sound very masculine and strong. I immediately heard the car door closing shut again, the engine start, and saw the car taking off and heading to the farthest end of the lake. I quickly put my fire out and jumped in the back of my car. Never have I been happier to have a camper set up in my car that night, for I would not have been able to sleep in my tent. Since I have a bit of night blindness, and the road was in terrible condition, I felt staying the night was the safest thing to do. I slept extremely bad that night. I kept waking up to sounds and kept checking whether I locked my doors. At one point, I remember hearing my door open and panic rushing through my body. How did he get in? All I saw were 2 dirty hands holding my pillow and pushing it on my face. I woke up, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. To this day, it's one of the scariest and most realistic nightmares I've ever had. That morning, I rushed off as soon as the sun had risen. To this very day, I don't know who pulled up next to me that evening, and I wonder if I gave that person the same scare they gave me, given the fact that they rushed off to the other side of the lake. I do know the mind can play tricks on us, especially when we're alone in the wilderness. Yet, at the same time, I do feel our gut feeling warns us for a reason sometimes. Anyway, it's an amusing story, and I do try to tell people now where I plan on staying overnight if I'm out there by myself again. This happened in May 2007, and for reference, I'm female. I was 20 at the time and weighed about 155 pounds, so overpowering me would have been extremely easy. I live in a city in Northern Ireland, and at the time, I was best friends with my ex-boyfriend. My ex-boyfriend's cousin's band decided to play a small gig way out in the countryside, so we had to drive for about an hour or more to get to the location. We arrived, and it was literally a field amongst fields, smack bang in the back ass of nowhere. Apparently, one of the members of the band knew the owner of this field, and apparently we had permission to be there. I never checked, so I don't know, but whatever. There were several cars already there when we arrived. My ex, his sister, two of our friends and I traveled together. We had packed the car full of tents, sleeping bags, and a ton of alcohol. The plan was to watch the band, then blast some tunes, have a bit of a party, and spend the night in the field in our tents. The way the field was laid out was kind of in an L shape. All the tents were set up around the corner, and the band had set up a generator across the field on the other side. Then beside where the tents were, there was a hole in a bush to the other field. We went through there to go to the toilet to get some privacy from everyone. There was roughly 30 to 40 people in the field, and the band started playing. We started drinking and generally having a great time. Anytime I needed to pee, I went with my ex's sister or a friend, as it was a good few minutes' walk to the next field, and none of us wanted to go alone, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. I was sharing a tent with my ex for the night, and at about 3 a.m., I decided I'd had enough and wanted to go back to the tent to sleep. I told him I was going and made my journey across the field to the tents. As I got into the tent and pulled the zipper down, I felt someone tugging at it and assumed it was my ex, until I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Let me in," quite aggressively. I called out, "Who are you?" And he said, "I know you're alone in there. You can't hold the zipper down forever. Let me in." Over the next minute or so, I was gripping onto the zipper of the tent and holding both sides of the fabric together to prevent this guy from getting into my tent. A couple of times he managed to get the zipper up a bit, but I always managed to get it back down. For the life of me, I have no idea how I managed to do this. The whole time we were struggling against each other over the zipper, he kept saying things like, "I'm gonna get in eventually, bitch," and "It's gonna be worse for you if you don't fucking let me in." I was absolutely petrified. Then I heard my ex-boyfriend's booming voice shout, "What the fuck are you doing at that tent?" Then I heard a smack and a thud, and my ex called to ask me if I was okay. My ex saw what was happening, punched the guy, and he fell. He had watched me walk to the tents and watched this guy follow behind, assuming he was going to the bathroom, but he kept watching him to make sure. When he saw him turn towards the tents, he came over to make sure I was okay. Thank God he did. Anyway, a huge fight broke out, and then one of the creepy guy's friends ended up hitting him too. Turns out, he was known for this kind of creepy behavior and had been in trouble with the law for sexually harassing women in the past. And my ex's cousin had said that he was staying over at her house with her brother one night, and she woke up to find him standing in her room, watching her sleep. I really don't know what his intentions were. Had he managed to fight his way into the tent that night, no one would have heard anything as the music was so loud. But thank goodness my ex still cared enough about me to keep an eye on me as I made my way back to the tent that night. My ex actually bumped into the guy a few weeks later and told me that his lip was still pretty busted up and looked like he was going to have a permanent scar from the 2 punches. This happened to me over 30 years ago, but I remember the feeling of fear as if it were yesterday. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We were allowed to take a backpack, empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, a change of clothes, extra socks, halazone tablets, a small cooking pot and spoon. We were not allowed to bring food or water since part of our training was in identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike in to find a spot to set up camp. First, I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later for pickup. I was just loving life, just nature and myself. I had no fears, even as night began to fall. I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire and had a great feeling of peace. I slept well that night, but woke up thirsty. My search for a water source began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, placed the tablets in the water, and boiled it for good measure. Yuck, what a shitty taste. But at least I was hydrated. All went well, and I had a great time. Until my last day, that is. It was early afternoon on the last day, and time to break camp. I cleaned up my camp area and hiked out to my drop-off spot. As I sat, leaning against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that it had to be my pickup. As I waited, a vehicle that I'd never seen before pulled up on the dirt path in front of me. Immediately, I realized that I did not know the man who was driving. He gave me an odd look. My gut told me that he was bad news. He asked what I was doing there and if I was alone. I said that my friends were behind me, breaking camp. He gave me a knowing look, got back in his vehicle, and rode off. I was terrified. I knew that I had to hide, and fast. I ran into the woods and hid. As I ran, I heard the car come back. I stayed as quiet as I could and remained hidden. I heard him get out of the car. I could hear him calling to me and walking through the brush looking for me. I was so afraid. Eventually, he gave up, and I heard the car door slam, the engine start, and the car pull away. Going back to my drop-off point was not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I saw a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what had happened to me. He told me that I'd done the right thing, since a young woman had been assaulted the night before, and the police and forest service had been searching the area. Happily, he drove me to the base camp where I learned that another girl in my class had had a creepy encounter with the man the night before. She had scared him away by blowing a brass whistle until help arrived. If there's anything to be learned from this, it is being sure to always trust your gut feelings and never camp alone. My mother was a head night shift nurse for a rich health clinic where people would pay thousands of dollars to stay for 6 weeks to cure them of whatever illness they had. It was also in the middle of nowhere on 600 acres of land. The crazy thing about this place, though, was that since it had a lot of wilderness, it was known to have a lot of occult activity. I don't think it's related, but here's my story of when we lived there. This happened when I was 12 years old. Our one-story home was at the top of a hill where there was only one other house not too far from us. My mom, like every night, would drive her car to the clinic, which was roughly a little more than a mile away. You could always tell when she would be leaving or coming because there wasn't any pavement and it was strictly rocks and gravel, so the car would be extremely loud in the dead quiet of night. Early in the week, she had lost her keys and had been using her spare. This night in particular, I was sitting in my bedroom playing PlayStation when all of a sudden, I get this sudden heavy mental push to turn off everything, all the lights, and face the wall pretending to be asleep. My heart is racing for no reason since I'm just laying down, but no more than 5 minutes later, I hear my door open, yet I didn't hear any car drive up. Our home was fairly small with wooden floors. From the entrance, I hear heavy footsteps slowly walk through the living room, as if whoever is there is searching for something. They continue to walk into the kitchen, which my room is directly connected to. They then turn on the light in the kitchen. At this point, my heart is pounding so hard it's trying to rip through my chest, but that same mental urge is screaming, "Do not move. Do not make a sound." The steps walk through the kitchen and stop at the entrance overlooking where I'm sleeping. It felt like an eternity as I helplessly laid there with my eyes closed, focused on not moving while this person just stared at me. After who knows how long, the person slowly walked out of my home and left. I waited anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes before moving, just in case they were waiting for me to get up. I called my mom to see if she'd randomly stopped home. She said no. I told her what happened. We changed all the locks and added a bar lock. It's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me, but there are so many stories from when I lived at that place. It was so scary. Years ago, I was walking my dog with my sister at a farm right by my house. The farm owner, a nice lady who still runs it today, lets the public use the farm in the woods for free to walk their dogs, as long as dogs stay on their leads when by the farm animal pens and fields. The farm is quite big, and if you walk further in, there's a little woods at the back of it which are normally quite deserted. We always feel safe walking here though, because we've both known the farm owner since we were babies, and the walls surrounding the farm are massive and couldn't be easily climbed over, if that makes sense. Anyway, we go into the farm and make our way to the woods, because we can let the dog off his lead there. We let him off the lead and start walking around. The woods go in a big circle around the farm, so we usually just do a little lap of the woods before coming back into the farm and then going home. We're walking along, chatting, and then sitting ahead of us on a fallen tree log was a man. He was just sitting there. What I mean is he wasn't drinking a coffee he brought from the little farm shop at the farm. He didn't have a dog with him. He was just sitting on the log, staring straight ahead at the trees in the woods. We carry on walking, and as we come close to him, he suddenly looks over at us quite quickly and says, "The only way out of this place is over there," in this monotone voice, and points at the woods, a part of the woods that just leads to more woods, and then a brick wall that surrounds the farm. We just ignored him and carried on walking. We told the lady who owns the farm that there was a man in the woods, and she said she hadn't seen anyone go in there before us, but asked us nevertheless what he was doing. We said he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, but we did tell her what he said to us. She looked confused and went into the woods with us, and she asked us to show her where he had been. So we did. We showed her where he had pointed, and she said, "That leads to the wall that used to separate the farm from the railway tracks." Apparently, years before there was a railway next to the farm that stopped being used for whatever reason some 30 years before, and now just sits there overgrown and desolate. I don't know what the man meant by that being the only way out of the woods, but the whole thing made us feel unnerved. We never saw him again, and neither did the farm owner. This is kind of short and lighthearted, but still an odd thing I saw while on the extraterrestrial highway in Nevada. When I was in high school, my parents and I would take trips to Vegas during spring break. It was fun, and I would always look forward to them. One year, we drove the whole way from Oregon to Vegas, making little stops along the way to visit many different places. One day of the trip, we were on the extraterrestrial highway, making our way down to Vegas. Being 15 and into the paranormal and weird stuff, I thought it was a cool experience. As we are driving, I notice a white van with government plates. I looked to see who was driving the van, and I shit you not, it was two guys in black suits with sunglasses. They even had earpieces. I was thinking, no fucking way, this is hilarious, and a bit coincidental. I stuck my arm out the window to wave at them, but they didn't wave back. I kept looking at them until they took a turn onto some dirt road that led out into the middle of the desert. It was just an odd experience. It's easily explainable, but still a bit odd and very coincidental. I just wanted to share. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to ad-free videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.